Thank you for downloading Season 5, Episode 6 of Baseball Pitching the Fix. I am your host, Joe Janish, and with me, as always, is baseball pitching motion expert Angel Borrelli. And in this episode, we are going to be talking about some lessons from Major League Baseball, where our subject will be Noah Syndergaard and his index finger issue. In our teaching moment, we will continue our discussion on releasing the ball as close to the plate as possible. And in the ninth inning, the closer is going to dig into her bag of tricks and throw us a curveball most likely. So, Angel, thank you once again for joining us and sharing your knowledge. How are we doing today?
I'm doing great, and yes, it's great to be here, and I'm really excited about today's show.
I am too, and I have to say that our first segment, Lessons from Major League Baseball, kind of come from a little bit of a selfish thing, because you and I had a conversation offline about how I have a little bit of an index finger problem that needs some medical attention, and it just so happens that Noah Syndergaard, one of the best pitchers in baseball for the last couple of years, and right here in New York, from the New York Mets, he suffered what has been termed a strained ligament in his index finger and of his pitching finger. And this has been, of course, a big deal because he's been out now for a month, and it's been a total month now that he's been out. And I just read in the newspaper that he said that he's like blown away that it's been this long that he's been out. He expected to be back earlier because, he thought the index finger is such a minor issue. And I was thinking back to the conversation I had with you on how like the index finger is so important to someone on an everyday basis. So I thought, my goodness, if you're a major league pitcher, the index finger would be a pretty important thing. It's not a little injury. It's not a little thing. And the other thing too is I don't really recall hearing about many other pitchers having an injury like this. I'm sure pitchers have had injuries like this, but that I just don't recall anyone having a strained index finger or whatever it is that he's experiencing. It seems very unusual. So I thought, you know what? Let's bring it up in the next episode. So Angel, tell me anything you can tell me about the importance of the index finger for a pitcher, especially a power pitcher like Noah Syndergaard, and what might be going on here. What could be causing this issue?
Well, I love this topic right now, not so much because it's deeper than just the finger issue. So first of all, I don't have to tell. I think it's funny that he thinks the index finger isn't that important since it is really, when pitchers talk about it and I talk about it with them. And of course, I've studied things and, the pitchers pretty much know that the index finger is responsible for movement, and they're always moving that around sometimes to make a pitch work. And especially the placement of it is different on, some of the exotic pitches. So I think it's interesting that he didn't know it was that important, or he thinks it's just a little small part of the body. But also, too, pitchers never want to kind of talk like the glass is half empty. So there may be a lot of that, too, especially to the reporters. So we have to assume that he can't be that blind that the index finger isn't important. So that's the first thing. Secondly, there is a little bit of an error in the way they're talking about this. Now, I'm not a doctor, but of course I had to study sports medicine. And one of the things you learn early on is that ligaments get sprained, that's SP as in Paul, and tendons get strained, T as in tendon. And this is something you learn early on. You don't hear about sprained tendons. You hear about strained tendons. So when they put in the headlines a strained ligament, it's either that he has a tendon issue or a ligament issue. So, and probably in the finger, it would be a ligament issue. So my guess is there's an error in the reporter hearing the diagnosis, or because doctors would not make that error unless there's something that I don't know. Maybe he's got strains and sprains, and this is what they're calling it. So that's a little bit unusual, but it doesn't matter. He got a sore finger. He went to the doctor, and he has some diagnosis that has him on the bench. So, and I think the take-home message, the reason why I think this is an important thing to discuss is that this is an example of something that needs to be investigated thoroughly. And I want, first of all, I want the listeners to know that you just told me about this, half an hour ago, so that when the questions I'm going to ask you are going to reflect the kinds of questions coaches, fathers, pitchers, these are the kinds of questions that the second you have a problem like this that has surfaced, the kinds of questions you need to ask and answer and investigate probably the minute you know you have something going on, so that when you go to the doctor, you have a full picture for him. Because while the doctors are in diagnosis, the geniuses, as a pitcher, he's going to get better through rest. But we have to know some things about this injury. So, Joe, I want to ask you the questions that I would ask the pitcher if he were standing here. So, of course, if the pitcher were standing here, I would be asking, first of all, did it go from feeling something to like really bad? Was he pitching through it, et cetera? And we don't know the answers to the questions, but you do a little bit of investigation on how long is it hurt? Was it a little bit and then it went away and it came back? You want to kind of get a pattern and a timeline as to how long has this finger been talking to you and how loud has it been? Has it been whispering? Has it been screaming? And then the additional questions I would ask. So I'm going to ask you this. So first of all, tell me, Joe, how has Noah's performance been in terms of his location? Probably his location is what I would want to know about.
Yeah, you know what? This year, his numbers have been pretty decent, but he's not been the dominant Noah Syndergaard he's been in the past. And that was something that just struck me, was that what's going on, because his velocity seemed to be up there. But yeah, I would say he was throwing strikes. He wasn't necessarily walking guys, but I think his location must have been off because he was getting hit a little more frequently than in the past. He wasn't his dominant self this year, and I did seem unusual.
Okay. So you want to get everybody, you want to ask these kinds of questions to an injury, especially in the hand, because the fingers are the pressure. And coaches, you know this better than I do. Okay. So you understand the importance of the placement of the fingers, but the pressure of the fingers. And when you think about the baseball and you think about the thumb underneath and the two fingers on top, and then you've got the little finger sometimes underneath, sometimes right on the side. You want to get that if these two fingers on top, they work as a team and they have a relationship between strength, which is usually the middle finger, and then location and pressure and direction of the index finger. When you change the ability of one finger in your hand, like as a human being, if you've ever lost one finger or it's sprained, all of a sudden the other fingers start to work harder. And in pitching, when you don't have that many fingers responsible for what the ball does, you're going to have extra work in the other important finger. So, for example, I don't know anything about his pitching or his pitch types, but if he's putting more pressure on the middle finger than he is on the index finger, he might be missing in the direction, like if he's a righty. I can't remember this. He's a righty, correct?
Yes, he's a righty.
Yes, he would like if he put too much pressure on the index finger, the ball would probably move to the right in a way he wouldn't want. Okay, so the fingers work together. The other thing that's critical is, and it's funny because this was almost going to be a topic today, but I said I'm probably boring everybody with my obsession with the changeup and all the other pitches I'm talking about. The thumb is so important to the hand. If anybody's ever had a thumb injury, they're shaking their head right now saying yes. If you get arthritis in your thumb or your thumb hurts, your whole hand goes down. It's awful. And the index finger and the thumb work because they're next to each other. They're very important to the hand. And so now you've got a thumb that's taking a little bit of an extra beating, and the thumb's under the ball. And believe it or not, the thumb, which nobody pays attention to me, is one of the most intriguing fingers of the pitch because whatever your thumb is doing is going to control how much your wrist is going to do. And if your wrist is compromised because your thumb is hanging on more, it's because the finger above it isn't working right. And obviously, if it's sprained, the ligaments are stretched. So now we've got, he's got to press harder and he's hurting more. If it's hurting a lot, he's not going to press hard enough. So something has to take up that slack. So now you've got a thumb that's maybe applying more pressure, and now you're tightening up the wrist. That would call for the problem with the velocity. So you've got the direction finger, excuse me, yes, the direction finger compromised. You've got the finger under the ball probably doing some extra work, which is going to limit the movement of the wrist. So now you've got the velocity issue. So do you see why the first question I asked was, how was his performance? Because that starts to tell you, one, and everybody hear this, it tells you how much the pitcher isn't being forthcoming about the details about how long it's been hurting. Let's say you said to me, Angel, up until 4 weeks ago, he was fine. And then 4 weeks ago, he fell apart. He started really doing poorly. And then let's say he says, oh, my finger just started hurting last week. Well, he's not lying. It just took him 3 weeks to be able to actually be okay with identifying it. Trust me, when you've got gamers on the mound, this is going to be their tendency. So we as coaches need to know that and know these kids aren't lying. We need to ask questions. And by asking the question, the pitcher himself will probably go, oh, wow. You know what? You're right. I started having trouble. And actually, my finger wasn't hurting, but I did notice that my balls were moving. And before you know it, you get to the bottom of number one, when did it start? And then you get a little more information. Now, what you're doing is putting the pitcher into the place where he has more knowledge. Now, why are we doing all this? Why do we want the pitcher to have more knowledge? If you don't know why it happened, then you're running the risk of it happening again. Now, the next question would be, and this would be a question I'd ask a pitcher, and Joe, you're probably not going to know this. I would be asking him, have you started working on a new pitch? And he might not have added a pitch to his arsenal that he uses when he's, making a start, but he may, say, well, I did start to move my hand. I decided to move my finger a little bit, or, on the side, I've been working on this. And then for you coaches who know even more about pitches than I do, you can start to connect dots. Now, when you start to get how this happened, because why would this just happen overnight? Now, you also want to say, is there anything you've been doing in your life that has been, that could have strained your hands? Well, I've become a video gamer and I didn't want to tell anybody, or something that uses the hand in an unusual way. This is information for prevention and also for correct rehab. So that is what we want to do when a pitcher has an injury, particularly when all of a sudden something, and it's not really a common injury, but all of a sudden something happens. And everybody, think about it. If your car alarm started going off every night, you'd be getting it into the store to say, why all of a sudden is my alarm going off? Anything in our life that all of a sudden it happens, you want to get it fixed, but you want to know why it happened, because you're like, well, why did this just randomly happen? It's scary when we can't answer the questions of randomness. So with injuries, particularly for a pitcher, this is critical. Now, the other thing I want to mention here is, guys, your pitchers should be on finger, hand, and wrist strengthening programs. I don't know why everybody forgets the fingers. And I'm a fan of the rice bucket. I'm a fan of wrist exercises. The fingers and the wrist are part of the forearm, and and finger injuries lead to wrist strain, and then the wrist strain leads to forearm strain. And Joe, Test question: when
Yep.
your forearm becomes strained, what's the next injury that happens?
Oh, elbow.
Yes, exactly. The UCL becomes compromised because the forearm is responsible for protecting it. Okay, so protecting, and there's so many structures there that work intimately. So, is this important? Yes, understanding it is very important. And I hope that this is what his coaches are doing. And this sometimes means you have to sit with the pitcher and talk to him for an hour. When pitchers call me to make an appointment for an injury, I do this right then and there on the phone. I need to get them talking. I want to know everything. Now, in the National League, they're swinging bats. Does he swing a bat?
Yeah, absolutely.
I would absolutely be looking at the bat.
Okay.
Okay. I'd be looking at I'd say, okay, let's talk about hitting now. So I saw a pitcher, for example, having a grip. He's a high school pitcher, and he had his index finger off the bat. Now, I'm not a hitting expert, even though last week I pretended to be. We'll forget that one.
Yeah.
But anyway, I saw his index finger off the bat. So every finger's gripping, but his index finger. So I go, why are you doing that? And he says, oh, a lot of hitters do it. And I said, really? And I walk away going, if you're grabbing onto something tightly and you have one finger that isn't, you're straining the fingers around it. And so, I mean, you could be straining your wrist. So I thought that's interesting. And of course, if I was in the world of hitting, I would be on that, investigating it. I'm intrigued by it. But I would also be looking to what he does when he swings a bat. He might say, "Oh, you know what? I did. I changed my grip, or I changed my bat, or I changed the bat." I mean, there's so many things. But everybody, please, the take-home message is: when injuries occur, find out why they occurred, get to the cause of it, and then make sure it doesn't happen again. That's the take home message. And what we can learn from the major leagues is that when things happen, if you don't find out the cause, they will happen again. And just ask all the pitchers who right now we wonder, where did they go? Where are they? They retired because they had one Tommy John, two Tommy Johns, three. There's no reason for that to happen if you investigate the cause. So there is my Noah Syndergaard index finger take.
Well, there you go.
There you go.
Yeah, it's interesting. You're talking about, is the pitcher doing something off the field? And the first thing that came to my mind was Bronson Arroyo, who pitched for the Red Sox and the Reds and many other teams. I remember he had a pretty serious, I want to say it was either a wrist injury or forearm injury. And apparently it was due to him playing too much guitar because he loves to play the guitar. So that was the first thing that came to my mind. But in Noah Syndergaard's case, I'm really not sure what it could have been.
Mhm.
He was throwing 100 miles an hour as of his very first spring training
Yes.
appearance. And I know that he'd been working
Yes.
on his curveball a little more this spring. I mean, it
Mhm.
wasn't a new pitch, but he
Mhm.
definitely made a point of wanting to do his work on his breaking pitches a little more. His bat, he's a very good hitter, actually. He's probably one of the better hitting
Mhm.
pitchers in baseball. And he
Mhm.
does, I don't recall him taking off his index finger when he hits, but he definitely hits in a style where he lets go of his top hand after the follow through. So he's still gripping on to the bat,
Mhm.
and
Mhm.
he's a left-handed hitter. So when he's holding on to the bat after he swings with just the one hand, it's his right
Ah.
hand that he's holding on to the bat with when he follows
Mhm.
through. So I mean, who knows? It could have been any of many things that you brought up. So, but that's really interesting.
Yes. Yeah, no, important to investigate, and I hope that Noah has, because he's a highly respected pitcher. When I mention his name to pitchers, or when pitchers talk about, other great pitchers, when his name comes up, they talk about him like they with the highest of respect for his stuff, and I think that when you have a pitcher that's that good, you've gotta protect that hand and that arm, and he needs knowledge right now because, this has to, get handled. So I hope he has asked himself these questions. I hope someone has sat down with him and investigated this with him, because that way he'll be able to return to play. And but you know what? You're going to know right away if he's okay, because if he's not okay, you're going to see just how important that index finger is.
Yeah. Well, apparently he's just started throwing again. I just saw a report today that he was throwing at 120 feet. But I imagine it's going to be several weeks before he gets back to the major leagues. I mean, he hasn't picked up a baseball in a month, so
Yeah, yeah.
we'll keep an eye on that and see how that
Yes.
goes.
Great topic, Joe.
Well, thank you. So let's move on to our next segment, which is our teaching moment. And we started in our last episode talking about how pitchers can release the ball closer to the plate. And of course, that enhances velocity. And we're going to continue that discussion today. So, Angel, take the floor and tell us more about getting over that front leg and releasing the ball closer to home plate.
Okay, so today I want to talk about 3 reasons why a pitcher can't get over the front leg, 3 faults that he has in his stride that would prevent that. But before I start, first, I want to thank everybody who contacted me about this. And I had people calling me about the drill I talked to them about, but I had the funniest phone call from a pitcher, and he says, Angel, I'm sitting in a chair when I release the ball. He took literally, I mean, it was so funny. I said, he listened to what I said. He apparently looked at some film. He says, yeah, you're right. I look like I'm sitting in a chair. He says, and you know what? I've had a tendency to do that. I can't tell you how I love when I get calls like this, because for a pitcher to identify the thing he needs to work on, that is so important. It's so important. And we're looking for progress, not perfection. So thank you, all of you who called. And of course, because of the questions I was asked, that of course prompted part B of this discussion. So the first thing so first of all, to get over the front leg, if you did the drill I talked about last week, which is really not a drill, it's really more of allowing the pitcher to see, well, where is over my front leg? So you just got over on one leg, you tilted over as if you were in a follow through, and you stayed there for a few minutes playing catch so that you could see, what does it take to get my center of mass right over my foot so I can be properly over the front leg. Okay. So assuming you've done that, you understand that in order to do that, you actually have to get to your front leg. And when you get there, you have to be stable in the front leg. And that means your knee's got to be over your ankle, as I talked about last week. Well, why would you not be able to get to your front leg, given that you're born with 2 legs? And when you spread out in a stride, you've got the length of your back leg and you've got the length of your front leg, and your body's going to be kind of in the middle. So you have 2 legs that are the same length. Why would the back leg ever not be long enough, in a sense, to get you to your front leg? So there's 3 reasons why that happens. The first reason is the rear leg lowers so much. And hey, you guys out there that do that, you know who you are, because I've had pitchers say they actually have a dirty knee, or they bleed in their knee because their back leg lowers so much. Why does the back leg lower so much in a stride? It's not supposed to be turning. And when the back leg turns as the pitcher is striding out, meaning from the hip, he's turning his knee inward. And so it'll almost look like he's bringing his hips around, but he doesn't necessarily have to be. But if his knee starts to aim towards the plate as he's still going sideways, that leg is going to be getting shorter and shorter, and it's going to pull the body down. And when the body gets pulled down to the ground, you lose length in the back leg. The next thing that will happen is your front leg will land too low, because now the back leg has pulled you down towards the ground. Remember, you're supposed to go forward towards the plate, not down. And when you go down towards the ground, you don't have the correct length to your body, and your center of mass will stay behind the front foot, and you will be doing the famous pitching from sitting in a chair kind of look. That's how you'll look from the side. So the back leg is supposed to move sideways. The knee does not have any rotation capabilities. The hip is the only thing that turns the knee, but for some reason, pitchers think the knee is supposed to turn towards the plate. So do not turn the back leg. in the socket. Do not turn the leg. The leg should stay in the same plane. In other words, if when you do a jumping jack, get in a jumping jack landing position. Look down at your, if you're a righty, look down at your right leg, and the way that leg looks when you are in a jumping jack landed position is the way it's supposed to look as you're striding out and as you land. As close to that as possible. That means the knee is facing outward, it's not facing towards the plate. That will keep your height up and it keeps the leg the real length that it is. And now you can get to your front leg. So that's the thing I see. It's not the most common. It's probably the second most common reason for the back leg seeming to be too short to push you to the front leg. Does that make sense, Joe?
Yeah, I want to just talk to you about this for a second though. So you're saying that if the back leg hits the ground, the knee hits the dirt, that's not a good thing.
No, because that means the leg had to lose its length. If the knee is down towards the ground, the knee flexed, and so it's lowering and it becomes shorter. You want the back leg to lengthen.
So the reason I bring this up is because one of the most famous best pitchers of the
Right,
1970s is Tom Seaver. And Tom Seaver
right,
wrote one of the seminal books on pitching called The Art of Pitching.
all right.
And he advocated dropping down the back leg, the right leg in his case. And he would say that he knew he was pitching really well and he had his mechanics on
When,
point when
right.
his right knee was getting dirty. And now what you're saying is that this is not something to aspire to.
No, and in fact, Joe, you're kind of. I'm going to be addressing something similar to this in the last segment, but yes, and not to say that he wasn't a good pitcher or whatever. I don't know what he did. I don't know what he thinks he did. There's pitchers that. I mean, when you talk about getting off the back leg, they say controlled fall. They say all these different words because pitchers are trying to describe what they do.
Right.
Pitchers can't really describe what they do because they're doing it. Okay, that's why we have coaches
Yeah.
and they're experts at it. Not to say he's right or wrong, but this is something you don't want to aspire to do, especially if you're having trouble getting over your front leg. If, let's say, you're somebody who drops the knee low, but you're getting over your front leg all the way and your shoulders are in front of your foot at ball release, not after you release the ball, at ball release, then you know what? Awesome. Because you have found a way to not let that thing hold you back. You somehow got forward enough before the knee touched the ground. But if the knee starts to turn in too soon, you're never going to have a chance to get out far enough to get to the front leg. And in fact, you'll be reaching with your lower leg of the front leg, and then that foot gets away from you. Remember, we want the foot and the knee to kind of stay together. You need to, once you land, that knee has to arrange itself over that ankle.
Okay.
Okay.
Yep.
But I'm going to address a point that you're bringing up about this in the last segment. So hold on to that thought.
Okay, great.
Yeah. Now the second thing I'm going to bring up is the thing we all know about. Talked about it before. Not being able to get over your front leg. The most common reason that I see for a pitcher not being able to do that is he's either leaping off of the back leg or he's going down the hill so fast that his front leg reaches out and it may swing, it may do some various number of things, but the knee extends the lower leg out and the foot comes down and it comes down not where you're placing it, not where you are in relationship to the length of your body. It's coming down and slamming down because you, one, are jumping onto it, or two, you went down the hill so fast that the foot is reaching, and then you're not in an optimal position to push the knee over the foot. And then the only thing you can do is pull the knee backwards to stabilize yourself. And then you have that look of looking like you just landed in a jumping jack with the front leg. Your knee is behind the foot. So you have to be in control of your physique as you're going down the hill. So you know how to lengthen off the back leg, ride the inside of that leg, take your center of mass forward, place the foot down, and have some room left over to push your center of mass forward over your foot. And then, of course, you're tilting over your leg. So having an inappropriate speed down the hill or jumping from the back leg to the front leg. And I have seen that a few times in the last week and many times in the last few months. And because people are thinking that the speed of how you get down the hill has something to do with velocity, many people are trying to do that, and it can lead to problems. Now, again, I'm going to say this. If you're somebody who does this and you get over your front leg, excellent, because you have somehow found a way to still get it done without being efficient. But for normal purposes and for teaching purposes, this is the problem you can run into. And if you are trying to get over your front leg and you're seeing that you can't, look to see if this flaw exists, because that would be the place you would want to work. So mainly, Joe, I'm wanting to show people where to look if they actually have this problem. Because, and again, I'm going to mention this in the last segment, we could go on all day about people who do things wrong and they're great pitchers. Okay. So it's
Yeah.
not to say, that nobody does this, or that if you do it, you're never going to be good. Okay. But for somebody who does what I do, my job is to teach the correct way.
Yeah, no, and that's fine. I
Yeah,
mean,
exactly.
there some athletes, have so much athleticism that they can overcome the flaws that
Yes.
that they do, and like you said, doesn't make them bad pitch. It's just, I'm thinking back to when I was in high school, and my friends and I, when we were pitching, we were trying to emulate things like what people call the drop and drive delivery, where your back
Hmm.
leg gets dirtier. Or it's important that the mere mortals like us don't try to do the things that these athletes are doing incorrectly, because these athletes have so much athleticism, or they're somehow managing to overcome
Yes.
it. So it's important that we understand what are flaws and what are not. And just because a pitcher does something a certain way that may seem a little unusual or a little different doesn't necessarily mean that's the thing that makes him so great.
Yes. Absolutely. Well said. So now moving on to the last and final thing you want to look for. Um, so if you are having an artificial length to your stride and your foot gets away from your body, meaning it's you, like I said, when you're going too fast, your foot just lands wherever it can, and the back knee straightens backward. You can't get over your foot because now you've taken if you look at that picture from the side, his lower leg's going to be angling backward. When you have that configuration, that's not a good configuration to have. You can't get over your foot that way. The reasons I just gave are one reason why you get into that position, because your stride is faulty in its length due to too much speed, et cetera, et cetera. But another reason why pitchers can't get over their front leg is they intentionally pull the knee backward. They may have beautiful stride. They may be right in position to get right over that foot, but they straighten the knee. In fact, they do it in a very jarring motion. Um, Remember Randy Johnson?
Sure.
He did this, and what body part gave out on him? His knee.
Right. Yeah, his knee. Of
Yeah.
course.
The knee is not designed to do that. Any physical therapist, any doctor will tell you, you don't hyperextend your knee like that. But there are pitchers who do this because they've been taught to do it. There's also many young kids that do it because guess why they're doing it? Guess why they're doing it in pitching? Guess why they think it's okay to do in pitching? Because it's what you do when you hit.
Ah,
Mhm.
interesting.
So, yes. So, I work with a really great pitcher who has a front leg that people look at and they go, "Oh, it's such a weird front leg." It ends up in a great place, but he looks like he's hitting when he's striding out. And it took me a while to make the connection because the kid hits home runs when he swings a bat. So, it's like, okay, when kids hit more than they pitch. Kids love hitting, and that is what you do in hitting. Why are you doing it? Because you don't wanna go forward. So you pull the knee backward and it stabilizes. Correct, Joe?
Yes.
Okay. But in pitching, you wanna go forward, but when you have a skill that's different than another skill, but in your head it's similar, you start to bring one skill to the other. That is why when I see a catcher on the mound, I can tell he's a catcher. When I see a shortstop on the mound, I can tell I'll say, "Did you used to be a shortstop?" "Yes," because they bring the ball in differently. They bring the ball in a way that is more like what they did on the infield. So when you see a knee straightening, I mean, this is not a good thing because it pulls the pitcher's center of mass backwards. Yes, he's stabilizing, but it isn't accomplishing getting over the front leg. And yes, if he's throwing 98, awesome, and he doesn't wanna change it, awesome, but if he does wanna change it, or let's say he's throwing 88 and he says, "Why can't I get to 91?" I'm like, "Okay," and then you have to show him, and then, of course, he makes the decision. These are things we need to understand when you're working with people who wanna improve. Also, it's really bad on the knee to do that. Not when you're hitting so much, and, probably even when you're hitting, it's got some component, but you're not stretched out the same way, and it's the forces are distributed differently. But when you're pitching and you do this, especially when you do it with force, that can trash that front knee. So that is another thing to look for. You're not hitting, but it's why it's such a common error, and it took me a long time to connect that dot. To me, that is something valuable for youth coaches to see when you see the kid using his front leg the way he does in hitting, because they will emulate that because it almost feels like it's a normal thing to do, to a child,
Yeah.
especially. So those are 3 things that can give you the problem of why can't I get over my front leg? Okay, she's right. I saw how far over I can get when I'm doing that little drill. And yes, I looked at film and I'm sitting back in a chair. My center of mass, which is your belt buckle, when I draw a line straight down to the ground, I'm way behind my front foot. Why? Well, look to one of these 3 things. 95% of you, if you're asking that question, you're doing one of these 3 things. And if you know what you're doing, then you can start to make that change. So there is the final segment on our getting over the front leg.
Well, that was pretty amazing. I mean, these are things that I've definitely seen at every level, from little leagues to the big leagues. I've seen pitchers doing these things incorrectly, and as I said in our last segment, probably 90% of major league pitchers don't get over their front leg properly, and really aren't throwing close enough to the plate, which is amazing. It's amazing how talented and athletic that they are, that they can still throw 99, 100 miles an hour without getting over their front leg. So it's kind of scary to think if any of these guys actually fix their issues.
Yeah.
So this brings us to the ninth inning, and I am waving my right hand to bring in the right-hander from the bullpen, and Angel Borrelli, come on in and close it out.
Yeah, that's right. Well, I hate to say it, but you kind of, you always ask what I'm going to talk about, and I always say I'm not going to tell you.
Yep.
Well, you kind of did a pretty good job of almost reading my mind, because the thing I want to talk about today is you brought it up twice. Um, the seriousness and the scariness of comparing or looking at a major league pitcher and thinking that that is what you should be doing, or teaching that because somebody is having success. This is a very scary thing that happens in the world, and when that app came out years ago, I don't even know the name of it, I wouldn't say it if I did, but it made it easier for you to take your son and put him next to a picture and then show the differences, and this is scary because the most important thing when you're troubleshooting or teaching somebody to do something is to see what's special about them. And when you see what's special and your eye is trained to do that, all of a sudden the things he's doing wrong look a little bit different. The things that, well, I shouldn't say wrong, the things he's doing that don't seem right, they have a different nuance to them because you've already seen what he does well. And then you work from who he is to start to model the kinds of things that are supposed to happen. And when the ASMI came out with, their positions in pitching and where the pitcher has to land, and I've talked a million times about stride foot contact. When that arm is there, the chances that the arm's going to be in the right place at max external rotation are pretty good. And those things are critical to being a good pitcher. You have availability of those pictures. If you take what's good about a pitcher and then you look to see if he's doing some of those things, then you're on track with trying to help that pitcher mold into an efficient motion. And for those of you who don't do it as a profession, be really careful about trying to teach pitching yourself. I know fathers love to teach their kids how to pitch, but there are professionals that do this. But be really careful if you're doing it to make sure that the model you're following is what we think is efficient, which is what we do all day long. We know there's an efficient way to drive. We know there's an efficient way to walk up and down stairs. We know that our doctors have told us how to bend over. We know we want to always try to do things in a correct manner. When you've got a pitcher who's throwing strikes, but he looks absolutely contorted, remember that that pitcher has maybe been doing that his whole life. He has worked on doing this odd thing with his body. You don't know what kind of soreness he has from it. And you also don't know the injuries that are about to happen. So just because you think his curveball's nasty or he is throwing so many strikes, be careful about trying to fit that into the model of what you want to do for your son or your pitcher. Because when you're doing that, you're not seeing what's great about that pitcher. The pitcher's motion should be organic from who he is, and then also applying the rules about where we want angles to be. When we say we want arms to be in a certain place, it's not just as, oh, we think it's really good when it's here because it really helps you throw hard. No, we're talking about if the elbow has a certain angle, then the shoulder will be feeling good. If the elbow doesn't have the angle, the shoulder's going to hurt. The elbow's at a certain angle, the ligaments are taut. If it's not at this angle, the ligaments can't help. I mean, our reasoning goes way deeper than what you would want to even know unless you have background. So trust that the model out there from science is a good one. And that is what you want to understand. And then also start with seeing what the pitcher is actually doing and what's great about him. The pitcher needs to be seen, and then he needs to develop according to what is going to work for him and how close he can come to what we want to see that's efficient for the body. If you are efficient in the body, the performance around the plate is going to show you that. If you try to teach something strange, like, I worried when Lincecum came on the scene because his mechanics were so unusual, and fathers were asking me to teach them how to pitch like him. There's another pitcher I was watching this morning. I don't want to mention any names. He's awesome. He's a lefty, but he has a very unusual way that he pitches, and he is one of the best pitchers. But what he does with his spine to make that happen is really scary. It's really scary, and anybody who works in the field of health or posture or movement knows. So when I see him doing so well, I'm so happy for him, but I get scared that someone's going to say, some father of a lefty, let's throw like him. So put your foot here and do this here with your arms. And it's scary to me. And now this guy has mastered it, but it's not something we want to teach. We want to have that pitcher bring out his excellence in the most healthy way possible. That's how we engineer a better generation as we move forward. So that's my take home message today. And with the Sievers thing you mentioned, like emulating him, uh, again, taking nothing away from him. I don't know where he was over his front foot. He might have been still behind his front foot and still being great. Hey, I have great pitchers that aren't over their foot as much as they could be. But guess what they ask me for in the off season? Help me get more over my front leg. I'm not getting over it as much as I can. They articulate this because they want to get better. So anyway, so Joe, you're reading my mind, and yeah, it's a danger to look at major league pitchers and compare. There should be a little sign on the TV that says, "Don't try this at home."
Well, I'm really glad that you have said all this, because when people, like coaches that I know and parents that I know, when they realize that I do this podcast with you, and they say, well, what's a good example of a major league pitcher with really good mechanics that my son can emulate, or what's a good example of a pitcher with great mechanics? I'm always at a loss, because I'm like, well, I don't really know that there's a pitcher out there that has perfect mechanics, or a pitcher that anyone should follow and it's basically because of all the things that you just said. And then now I feel like I have the answer when people ask me that question. Just don't don't do that. You should just
Yeah,
find someone like Angel Borrelli to look at your son's pitching, and she'll work with his body and his style and his uniqueness, and work from there. But I understand it. I understand it being there
yeah,
as a kid, wanting to emulate all of the great hitters and the great pitchers. I understand it as a
right.
coach, and I understand it from the parents' perspective. We want to know how it's supposed to be done, because we don't know how it's supposed to be
Yeah,
done, and so we look to the guys who are the best in the world, supposedly.
right,
And that's
right.
that's the one thing that I definitely have learned over the last 15 to 20
Mhm.
years, as I've examined baseball more closely from a coaching perspective. It's that those guys at the MLB level, they are just, for the most part, athletes. They are the top, 1% of athletes in the world. And it's more about their athleticism than necessarily the way that they do it. Now, granted, of course, there are things that they do very well, but there are a lot of them that have flaws here and there, and they're just so good athletically that they can overcome them. So,
Exactly. This morning, I was watching a comparison of Mike Trout. They were comparing Mike Trout to Hank Aaron and to someone else, and they were showing their hitting styles, right? And I think it might have been right prior to ball contact. And they were pointing out how one guy dropped his elbows, another guy did this. And they were saying, you know, some of them are actually doing things that a hitting coach would never teach. But of course, they're the greatest,
right.
right? And they were confused about how could this be, and that's and I thought, oh, well, I understand how it could be, but here's the thing: if you're asking who should my son emulate, that means you're lost in the sense that you don't know how to teach pitching, which is you shouldn't know, you shouldn't think you know. That means go get a pitching coach. Pitching coaches, they don't have to come to me. There's some great pitching coaches. They have to have a certain philosophy and believe in a certain thing, and that's what they should teach. If you find a coach, and boy, I hope I don't get calls from coaches, but I don't know anybody who really does this. If you find a pitching coach and he's putting your son up against another pitcher saying, we want him to do this, I would investigate more thoroughly if he's the pitching coach for you. If he doesn't know how to teach something that comes from him and he's wanting to match your son to somebody else, there may be a little gray area of his knowledge base. And I have only one time, twice known parents tend to do this. If you find yourself needing a model to tell you what to do, because remember that model could change every day, that means it's time for you to get your son a pitching coach, that you've outgrown being able to teach him. So that's kind of the take-home message. So anyway, but I hope great show today. I'm so happy to get this information out there because, you know, we want to save some arms.
Absolutely. That's the whole goal. That's why we're here. So, Angel, thanks so much. And thank you, listener, for tuning in once again to Season 5, Episode 6 of Baseball Pitching the Fix. For more about Angel, you can go to her website, gymscience.com. And if you would like to have a topic covered or you have a question about pitching, not hitting, but pitching, and or if you'd like to hire Angel to help you with pitching mechanics, just email angel@gymscience.com. That's all we have for now. I hope you learned a little bit. In about 2 weeks, we'll be back. And in the meantime, we wish you safe and effective performance on the pitching mound.